Now, I would like to introduce to you our distinguished speaker, Amy Webb. Ms. Webb is the founder and CEO of the Future Today Institute, as well as a professor at the NYU Stern School of Business. In this upcoming presentation, titled The Big Nine and Japan's Role in the Destiny of AI, she will discuss the mega corporations that are leading the field of technology, including artificial intelligence, and Japan's involvement in that competition. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Amy Webb.
Good morning, everybody. I have a little bit of setup, so while I'm plugging my computer in, I will tell you a few other quick things about me. I'm a quantitative futurist, so my job is to model data and to look for long-term risk and opportunity. And I do that with lots of different organizations all around the world, including central banks and the federal government, and some of the companies that you work for. The other thing about me is that I spent some time living in Japan. I spent a good chunk of my 20s, and I was in northern Japan in Iwate. Anybody from Iwate, Ken? Really? Awesome. I lived in Ishidoriyacho. You know it. There's just rice fields, and that's it. I loved it, and then I lived in Tokyo for a while. But the reason that I'm here to talk to you today is because I value our relationship. I think of Japan as very much as a second home, beyond a strategic partner. And it's such an honor to be here with all of you. Honestly, it's very humbling. So I'd like to take this precious little amount of time that I have with you to plug this in, and then show you some videos, lighten the mood a little bit. So this is a video of a cat I thought you might enjoy. Here it is. There's some volume. Mr. Sandman is playing in the background. There we go. And there's another, how about if I plug this in? That'll make it easier. There's another video that I thought was pretty funny that you might like. This is it. So I don't know who that kid is, but this is a really, really popular video. It's been seen millions of times. And that cat video was also super popular. It spawned other similar kinds of cat videos. Now, maybe some of you have seen these videos before. They were made using an app called TikTok. And if anybody in the room has a teenager or a younger person in your house, even if you don't know what this is, they do. Because this is an example of a new social media trend, one which I think we can all find very exciting. Instead of it being vitriol and horrible words screaming at each other, this is all just silly, fun, very short, 15-second positive videos. This is the new thing. And everybody is super excited about these short videos. Now, TikTok is an application that was made by a company called ByteDance. And ByteDance has made a whole bunch of different extremely popular applications, including another one called Musical.ly. And Musical.ly was popular years ago and has since gone dark. But for a time, kids could make their own music videos. Again, this is about fun, short, exciting content. Now, here's the piece of this that gets interesting. So ByteDance, as a larger company, is now among the world's top 5 most valuable startups. So valuations kind of mean whatever people in the investment community think they should mean, yet $75 billion is significant. They've spent more money on advertising than a lot of very large companies' annual budget for the entire organization. They spent more than $1 billion in the past year alone on advertising. They have 1.2 billion users worldwide, and that number is growing. At the moment, they are number 3 behind WhatsApp and Facebook, but those numbers are starting to equalize. So even if you haven't heard of this application or this company or this phenomenon, it's pretty big, it's pretty formidable. The other interesting thing about these ridiculous videos is that they're part of an open ecosystem. So if you want to share something like a video on Instagram or on Facebook, you have to be a part of that community in order to see it. This was not built that way. So you can share these videos basically anywhere that you want. You can share them off platform, but the metrics and the data continues to travel with them. TikTok, I think, much more so than an interesting social media company, is a fascinating AI company. It's an AI company that uses all kinds of deep learning to stitch together those videos, but also to recognize what's happening in those videos. They have very, very sophisticated data mining techniques. They also use geolocation to be able to track and understand where those videos are and where they're going. And so you may at this point possibly be wondering to yourselves, why is this woman showing us funny cat videos? What do these videos have to do with the future of the United States and Japan? And my answer to you and to that question is, it has everything to do with our shared futures. And that's because ByteDance is a Chinese company. Now, I realize that there's been a lot of fear-mongering when it comes to China, and my criticism of these conversations is that they're happening at these layers of abstraction, where it becomes easy for especially our government leaders to stereotype. But when you start peeling away and looking at the more finite, granular details, this story becomes much more interesting. ByteDance, when it still had this other app called Musical.ly, was fined by the FTC a record $5.7 million because it was collecting data on kids who were under 13 years old. Their claim was, well, that's just how the app works. My understanding of how that AI system worked was that they were revealing the tastes and preferences and behaviors of our children as a way of creating a much more comprehensive database, a data profile about them. Now, ByteDance will tell you, and TikTok will tell you over and over again, TikTok doesn't operate in China. We're not here. We are not, yes, technically we're Chinese, but we're not here. We're only based in the United States. And that may be true on paper, but there is a version of TikTok which shares many of the same back-end resources, that's its name in China, which is very much alive and well in other parts of the world. TikTok, as I mentioned, uses cutting-edge AI techniques. And as we all know, China has an unlimited supply of data because they don't have restrictions as we have in other parts of the world. The reason that this matters is because it's a wonderful way of understanding just how bifurcated the developmental track of artificial intelligence is right now. We hear the words AI so much that they sound meaningless, same as hearing the words blockchain or quantum. There are these buzzwords that don't entirely make sense to us. And also, we talk about these things as though they're way out on the future. They're not. Artificial intelligence is already here. It just didn't show up the way that we all expected. At the moment, there are 9 companies that are building out the entire future of AI. And the reason that it's these 9 companies and not governments or universities alone is because it's these companies that have the frameworks and the data sets. They have the overwhelming number of patents. They're able to attract the best and the brightest. They are very, very, very well capitalized. And also, they're sitting on huge amounts of data. And it's huge amounts of data that are required to train these systems and get them up to speed. 3 of these companies are based in China, Baidu, Alibaba, and Tencent. And the other 6 are based in the United States, Google, Microsoft, Amazon, Facebook, IBM, and Apple. Huawei is not up here. ZTE is not up here. And as are many other companies like NVIDIA, they're not up here. And the reason is because their systems plug into these frameworks. So for better or worse, it's these companies that are building the 3rd era of computing, because AI is not a tech trend. It is the connective tissue binding us all together as we march forward to the future. Which means that all of us, at the moment, have to swear allegiance to a side. you're working with US providers and developers, or you're working with China, which means that you ought to ask yourselves some questions like, whose values are going to wind up influencing our global futures, our global political futures, our global economic futures? Are they going to be Western democratic ideals, or are those values held dearly by the CCP? So I'd like to start with China. China, as we all know, has a president for life, and I think that Xi Jinping is extraordinarily bright, but also a visionary, and understands at a fundamental level how technology fits in to the broader plans of the CCP. The Belt and Road Initiative, which has been established as a Chinese policy to increase trade along the old Silk Road route, is doing things like going into Africa, where nobody else, no other diplomat, certainly not the United States, we don't have boots on the ground in these places. They're building physical infrastructure in exchange for debt, which will never get paid back, but they're also laying digital infrastructure, which is why 5G has been a topic of conversation. In addition to building roads and bridges, they're building fiber, and they're building conduit, and they're building all of the systems that will power not the emerging economies of today, but the emerged, maturing economies of tomorrow. And they're doing this by throwing a chunk of their sovereign wealth fund at developing areas of technology. People don't realize this, but there's now a mandatory book that'll start in kindergarten. And all children over the next couple of years will start learning the basic fundamentals and principles of things like artificial intelligence, which sounds crazy. I mean, I have a 9-year-old. I can't imagine having part of her school day dedicated to the fundamentals of deep learning, right? And yet, this is part of a grander plan. I know you've all heard about China's social credit score, which is not yet nationwide, but has been in progress and uses AI as the fundamental underpinning. This is where citizens are assigned scores based on meritorious work or work that is not meritorious or fitting in or not fitting in, and using a variety of different methods, and it varies by town. People are assigned a score. And if you, for example, have a good credit score, you're allowed to get into the best schools. You may get a scholarship to some of those schools. You can stay in luxury hotels. But if you don't have a high enough score, not only can you not participate in some of these fundamental areas of civic life, but you may be declined a promotion at work, even if your work is good enough. You may be 17.5 million people were not allowed to buy a plane ticket last year. So this is already in progress. And next month, there will be mandatory biometric scanning for all Chinese citizens who want to get online. So you may not be thinking, you may say, well, this is the US-Japan partnership, why are we talking about this? Well, because it relates back to ByteDance. So you won't find this page on the translated version of that company's website, but the Chinese version of the company's website talks about their AI labs and their partnerships with many different Chinese cities in an effort to help build out the social credit scoring system. And if any of your organizations do business in China, your businesses are in the process of being scored too, because there's also a state-mandated corporate social credit score system. China is in the process of deploying artificial intelligence systems, to some extent this surveillance scoring system, but other pieces of it, to 63 countries, and 36 of them are part of the BRI. It's all happening while we are distracted with other issues. I believe that it's taken us a really long time to come to terms with the fact that for both the United States and Japan, and everybody else in the world, artificial intelligence makes China a militaristic, diplomatic, and economic pacing threat. But let's talk about the United States. So meanwhile in America, we've got these companies who are all building out the frontiers of artificial intelligence, and with the exception of one, it's Facebook, with the exception of one, let's be honest, I don't think these companies are evil. I think these companies are doing everything that they can within the confines of a free market economy to both do what their shareholders want and do what the market demands. We're in a tight spot here in the United States. The challenge is that capitalism and free market strategies usually don't go hand in hand with what's best for the longer term public good. So we have problems of our own here. The real challenge, though, is that in the United States, I believe we have 3 different power centers. So unlike Beijing, where there's a consolidation of power and a top-down strategy, in the United States, we've got Capitol Hill that makes the laws, we have Wall Street that makes the money, and then we have the whole West Coast of the United States, from as far down as Los Angeles all the way up to Redmond. And these 3 different epicenters of power, unfortunately, aren't used to working together. I studied game theory in college, and to me, this is like a 3-sided prisoner's dilemma, where if only we could get these 3 different epicenters to collaborate, it would be to everybody's benefit. But at the moment, the mentality and the incentives are for them to compete. And that leaves us with some serious strategic vulnerabilities. We're right now having a conversation about whether to break up big tech. And yes, we've had some unbridled power issues that are probably going to lead us to ever-increasing challenges. But at the moment, it would be much better if we could figure out a way to incentivize everybody to collaborate, because what's on the horizon, quite frankly, is existential risk. So what about Japan? Well, I don't know if you knew this, but Japan is sort of in the middle, literally, of these 2 countries. And as a result, the middle of what's happening with artificial intelligence. And we have a geopolitical landscape that doesn't follow all of the predictive and risk profiles that we've had in the past. And yet we're applying a lot of the same strategies going forward. My concern is that it looks to me like the sort of silent conversation that's happening is that maybe Japan will become a proxy for a US confrontation with China. And I don't think that that's the right strategy for any of us going forward. Because where we're going is headfirst into a technological Cold War. And I even hesitate to use the term Cold War, but analogies are useful. They're a useful framing to help us think about things that are brand new, that we haven't experienced before. We are headed into something new and different. And this new and different world, where we have tensions that we've never seen before, fall into areas like cyberspace and artificial intelligence and quantum, and especially data. And what we have at the moment is no central union where we have all the different countries, or even strategic partnerships like we could have with our 2 countries, developing more global points of view on how we should all be living and working together going forward. So my question to you is, and perhaps for me, can Japan play a larger role in the future to make the future a better place? I think the answer is yes, but it's going to require some short-term sacrifices in exchange for long-term gain, and I think that every single person in this room can help out. So the first thing would be to drastically increase public and private sector investment. Today, Japan spends somewhere around $600 billion in the private sector, which is about $5 billion US, on artificial intelligence. And the government funding is around $500 million, or $60 billion. It would be difficult for me to explain to you how small these numbers are. I mean, they're orders of magnitude. The math doesn't work out for me to explain to you how drastically underfunded AI is in Japan. And I find this particularly interesting because I understand that the original budget for the Olympics, which has gone way past this, but that the original budget was $112 billion. I know that Olympics are important to countries for various reasons, but to me, this was an example of making a short-term gain that never ever was going to address the long-term risk. And I wonder if there might be a different way for us to think about this going forward. Is it possible for your organizations in the private sector to collaborate a little bit more, to invest a little bit more, to seed those startups and those universities and the partnerships that would start to build out an ecosystem that makes sense in Japan? I mean, for God's sake, you've got the best collaborative robotics, some of the best soft robotics, you're doing some of the best work in that space in the world. And yet we see limited investment spilling over into other sectors. And the government, like the American government, is not funding basic research in these critical areas of technology and science as it should be. The other thing to do is to encourage and reward business culture innovation. We just heard a wonderful conversation about Sony. I would say that the Sony Computer Science Lab, is one of the best on the planet. And I think that Sony has best-in-class computer vision, but you would never know it because there's not a culture developed to foster a spillover effect so that learnings from one area can spill over and begin to prompt and leverage new research and development in other areas. I believe that our best possible hope for the future is smarter, faster collaboration, meaningful collaboration, because the alternative is not good. Because here's what I think is coming. What if what China's really doing is building a new economic world order, one in which if you don't have a score, you don't get to participate? When I've mentioned this before to lawmakers, they say, we're the world's, you'll get the largest economy. There's no way that they're going to compete. And my answer is, what happens when all of these, even if it's a small bet, just a few of these emerging economies in Africa and in Latin America and other parts of the world, what happens when they start bubbling up? At that point, you've got scale in humans that we can't compete against because in the future, it's very likely that data becomes more valuable than the actual currency that we're using to trade on existing markets. And if that happens, with China at the helm, we all potentially get locked out. Which means that the future of warfare and conflict may not be militaristic. All these conversations about putting a nuclear station in Japan and what should be done, maybe these are not the only conversations we ought to be having. Maybe it's the business community that should inject themselves into the conversation as well. Because what if the future of warfare is economic in terms? And China's already got a head start. So I'm done now. And I know this is just the beginning, and it's a long time before you can drink. So let me just say this. The future is not predestined. I'm a futurist, and I will be the first person to tell you that there is no way to predict the future. There are too many possible permutations. That being said, failing to plan is planning to fail. And we have an opportunity right now, I think, to take this incredibly important relationship that we have and the friendship that we have to foster strategic collaborations. Because my great hope is that this wonderful organization, at its next big anniversary, at its 20th anniversary, that we're having a different conversation about the future, one that's a bit more optimistic in framing, and that we're all looking forward to a world in which everybody is able to grow and prosper. Thank you so much.